Good morning, everyone. Um, Good morning, Boker Tov. If you can wear your mask while you're seated, that would be well appreciated. Please wear your mask while you're seated. That would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much for coming this beautiful morning for an important event. I want to start with a big thank you to all those who helped make it happen. Dr. Cantor, of course, Ron Jackson, Dr. Alinoff, Dr. Laffer, Dan Kozov, Rabbi Glasser, and Cantor Berry. I want to give a big thank you to Melissa Berenson for organizing it, for Isabel and Dr. Siegel. Thank you so much. I also want to give a big thank you to the Brotherhood who cooked this amazing breakfast. If you have a wedding, a bar mitzvah, you know to go to, right? Yeah, thank you. About 4 months ago when I started here, I met, I think the first few days, I met with Isabel and Dr. Siegel, and we started to talk about Stand With Us, and then I asked them if they have speakers, and they gave me a list of speakers, and I looked at the list, and I think a day later, 2 days later, I got back to them and said, I want Hussein. I want Hussein after I read his background. And Hussein, I want to thank you so much for everything that you do for the Jewish people and for Israel. Shukran ya zalami, shukran ya ahi. Dr. Cantor, please.
I want to thank everybody for coming today. If you had the chance to look at the video of Aboubakr, it is just incredible. And I'm sure you're going to hear a lot of that today. I want to thank Gonan for putting this together. He is an incredible director and leader and enthusiast that has really added to our synagogue. And I want to thank Melissa Berenson, who will come up and speak next, for organizing and bringing Aboubakr here to our fair city. Just 3 comments that I hope that he'll answer, or why Aboubakr, who was a young man in Egypt, who grew up in an environment predominantly Muslim, but they're Coptic Christians, but a minority, and in a very strong anti-Semitic environment, became interested in Judaism. It is amazing, and he did it at his peril. I don't think that too many of us, including myself, would probably want to go through what he went through to learn about this, and he actually taught himself Hebrew while in Egypt. There's not too many Hebrew teachers, I think, in Egypt. And so how he was able to educate himself is an incredible concept. And then his family disowning him, plus the state security, certainly physically and emotionally, making life extremely difficult. And then he took the passage away from Egypt, leaving his family, his country, to come to the United States because of his interests. And I admire him incredibly, and I think you'll hear his story in more detail shortly. I want Melissa Berenson to come up and make a few comments, and then let's get on with the show.
I won't speak too long, but I want to say thank you for your warm welcome. I took this position as associate director back in August, and literally my first day at work was working with Jacksonville and Isabel and Alan, and this is my second trip here, and each time you've all made me feel very welcome, so I want to thank you very much and appreciate that. I'll tell you briefly about Stand With Us because I know everybody didn't really come to listen to me speak. We're waiting for Hussein. Stand With Us, please ask me questions after the program. I'm happy to answer anything. I just want everybody to understand that Stand With Us is a non-political international organization that focuses on education. We are an educational organization that teaches about Israel and combats against anti-Semitism. And we have grown here in Jacksonville with the help of Isabel and Alan in terms of forming the Northeast Florida chapter. And here in Jacksonville itself, we've now had our second high school intern, and we have an Emerson on the campus of UNF who is fabulous, and our Christian outreach coordinator is here, Mary Schulten, who is located in St. Augustine. And we also have the Middle School Israel Link program that is here in your area as well. And we'd like to continue to grow that. We'd like to double in size here in the Southeast. We're working to, we currently have 20 high school interns in the Southeast. We'd like to double that in the next school year to 40. We have 20 campus college Emersons, and we'd like to double that as well here in the Southeast. And our students are fighting on campus now more than ever against anti-Semitism. So we really appreciate your support in terms of helping us to do that, helping us to educate ourselves and our population at large. We thank you very much for inviting us and Hussein here to speak at the congregation today, and we hope you learn a lot, but please feel free to ask me any questions after the program. I will be here for a while afterwards. I'd like to introduce Isabel Ballotine, who you all know. She is the head of our Northeast Florida chapter, and she's done a fantastic job, and I appreciate everything you and Alan do. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. It's just been so wonderful seeing all your smiling faces, even with the masks on, but it's so great. And thank you all for coming, and I hope you've all had a chance to see the film. If you haven't seen the film, it will be live through today, so please catch it if you haven't. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, my Northeast Region Florida chapter, for being here today and supporting this event. Hussein Aboubakr Mansour was born in 1989 in Cairo, Egypt. He was a self-described reclusive internet nerd obsessed with comic books and the like. The ultimate villains in the local lore he was steeped in during his youth were the bloodthirsty Zionists, so Hussein began to study the supposed enemies of his people. Hussein studied Hebrew at Cairo University, but did not adapt to the curriculum, which was the official anti-Israel and anti-Semitic rhetoric of the regime. Hussein was persecuted by the Egyptian state police for being the first visitor to check out books and watch films at the Israeli Academic Center in Cairo. In 2010, he was surveilled, harassed, and jailed for his studies of Israel. Later the same year, he was suspected of being a Zionist agent and was held in military detention facility where he was tortured. When the Egyptian revolution swept in 2011, Hussein became an organizer in Tahrir Square. By 2012, the secret police of the Muslim Brotherhood regime again began harassing and persecuting Hussein for his contacts with Israelis and writings expressing hopes for coexistence and peace between the two people. He received asylum in the United States in 2014 and worked as an assistant professor of Hebrew studies in the Defense Language Institute. Hussein is the author of Minority of One, an autobiography about his life in Egypt. He currently works as an educator for Stand With Us. Hussein?
Thank you very much, everyone. Good morning, shalom, assalamu alaikum. Extremely happy and honored to be speaking to you all, and I'm especially happy being away from the cold of DC for a night. So thank you for inviting me to speak to such a lovely congregation. It's a great honor, and thank you for all of the beautiful introductions that it feels weird hearing about myself. My name is Hussein Aboubakr Mansour. As you heard, I'm originally from Cairo, Egypt, and I'm an educator for Stand With Us. And I'm not Jewish, I'm not Israeli, but I love the Jewish people, and I support the Jewish people, and I love Israel, and I support Israel. And I feel this is a mission for me in life, not to fight for or against anybody, but to try to bring people together, to see each other and see the truth, the human truth of each other through all of the distortions of history, all of the distortions of politics, and all of the distortions of conflicts and fairy tales. As you heard, I grew up in Egypt, and honestly, the journey that led me to be standing in front of you today didn't start really from passion or curiosity or love for Israel and the Jewish people. It started actually from very intense hatred. I hated Jews passionately and intensely more than anything else in the world. Now, don't be alarmed. I don't hate Jews anymore. Otherwise, this would be very uncomfortable to all of us. I grew up in a middle-class Arab Muslim family, actually in Giza. We say Cairo because Cairo is just so big, it swallowed all around it. But actually, the house I was born in, I could see the pyramids from my balcony, which was, of course, normal. You only realize that was cool after you grew up and leave it. And I had a normal childhood like every other child in the country. And from a very early age, I was fascinated by the stories about the battles of good and evil. I'm a nerd, I'm still a nerd to a large extent. Fascinated by the stories of good and evil, and there were a lot of those going around. And there was a specific story that was everywhere, that in this world there is a supervillain, and that supervillain controls almost the flow of human history itself. All of the political institutions, all of the financial institutions, that supervillain is engaged in some sort of a super secret conspiracy for world domination, and that supervillain is a Jew, and the embodiment of that Jewish villainy is the state of Israel. Those Zionist pigs who kill Palestinian children, drink their blood. And I heard those stories everywhere, in the mosque, in the school. The best movies had Jewish villains, and the best TV shows had Jewish villains. And I was fascinated by these stories. And these stories intensified infinitely in the beginning of the 2000s. Anybody remember what was going on at the beginning of the 2000s? A lot. 9/11 had just happened. There was a war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, and the Second Intifada. All of this, by the way, was going on at the same time. People don't realize this. Moreover, this was a new age of technology. Satellite TV. A new major network had just opened in the Middle East. You all know its name, Al Jazeera. And within all of this, there was a very radicalizing momentum, socially, culturally, I think not just in Egypt, but all over the Middle East, truly. And this idea that there is a conspiracy to destroy Arabs and Islam started to become inflamed in rhetoric and in sensation. You turn on the TV and you see the American soldiers are raiding Afghanistan, American planes are bombing Iraq, little Palestinian children throwing rocks at big Israeli tanks. And the story is, of course, that this is it. This is a conspiracy. The Jews and the Americans are killing us. And that for me, I was 12, 13 at the time. That for me was it. This is what's going on. I'm a part of this major battle. It's kind of living in Lord of the Rings, right? I'm a citizen of Middle Earth. There is Mordor out there, and they are sending their troops, and I have to do something about it. And because I'm a nerd, I decided to do the nerdiest thing possible, which is go online. High-speed internet was just starting, and teach myself the dark language of Mordor. That is Hebrew. And that way, and because you know Hebrew, if you don't know Hebrew, like if you're not from a Jewish background, it looks like sorcery. It's just like that. It's very fascinating script. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna go online, teach myself like the language of those people, and then I'll be a force for good. Funny story. I don't know if I said this in the documentary, but I actually sucked at languages till that point in my life. I failed. So we have English as a second language from a very early age in Egypt, but I failed it every single year. I'm not kidding, that I had to go to summer school for English. And once I was motivated by this overbearing hatred, my language learning skills were just unbelievable. And maybe there is an insight here about the power of passion, the power of hate. And this is why people, politicians, leaders like to use it, because sadly, it works. And I saw that in my life. I hated learning languages. Once I was motivated by this blind hatred, in a matter of a few years, my English and Hebrew were so good that I was able to read adult-level text in Hebrew and English. YouTube was starting in 2007. I was able to watch things in English and Hebrew about Jewish history, about the Jewish people, and I was fascinated. I was obsessed. I mean, I'm still obsessed, maybe in a different way, but I was obsessed. I wanted to learn everything about those people who destroy the world and want to destroy us, and everything bad happening to us is because of them. And the thing about Jewish history, I mean, Jewish history is crazy. All human history is, but Jewish history, if you go into Jewish history, you get a tour. You get the grand tour of human history. It took me to the Holocaust, modern anti-Semitism. It took me to the 19th century, to the rise of modernity, the Enlightenment. I learned about something called Bildung, German high culture. A guy named Moses Mendelssohn, who opened the gates of modernity and the fruits of the Enlightenment to Jews in Europe. Before that, I learned about medieval Jewish history, whether in Muslim lands or in Christendom at the time, the Inquisitions, Maimonides in Muslim Spain. Things that you wouldn't learn about, trust me, living in Egypt. Learned about, and then I reached antiquity, and I learned the beginning of the Jewish people, which was in the land of Israel. Without me knowing it, or unwittingly, this educational journey completely transformed the way I think about everything. The way I think about Jews, the way I think about Israel, the way I think about the world, the way I think about politics, the way I think about history. But most importantly, the way I think about myself and about my own identity. And basically made me not know what to think about myself. Who am I? It was an extremely painful journey, and doing it alone as a nerd, online, on the internet, in a time of the Middle East. If you think about it, this was the build-up for what became later the Arab Spring, right? So you can imagine there were old economic and political structures, social structures collapsing. There was a rise of Islamic extremism all around me. And I'm going in a whole different direction. And that was extremely lonely. And this is why the movie and the book are called Minority of One, because that's exactly how it felt. I'm condensing a lot here. But I started looking at Israel at a very different way, and understood what Zionism means, understood what the Jewish people went through. And the story of the Jewish people is this small nation that's been exiled, murdered, century after century, country after country, couldn't be more different than the story of the supervillain nation that controls money and power and all of this. And I realized that in the Egyptian society where I was growing up, we're living in fairy tales. Everybody is living in fairy tales. The teachers at school, the imams at the mosques on Friday. And of course, you know how normal people are. My parents are not bad people. They are not bin Ladens, by the way. They are just good people who are trying to raise their kids. But what do they know? My father is an accountant. Ironically, the closest thing to being Jewish. joke. My father was an accountant. He wanted to provide for his family like a good Arab father. My mother, like an observant Muslim woman, she wanted to stay home and raise the kids and feed them well. What does she know about all of this? Nothing. They turn on the TV. They see very respectable men in suits from the government telling them that the Jews are evil and that Israel is evil. What should they think? And then their little Hussein comes and tells them, no, this is wrong. You have kids. You know how well that goes. It felt extremely lonely. And 2010, I did the unthinkable. I broke one of the biggest taboos, which is actually reaching out to Israelis. I visited what was then the Israeli Academic Center in Cairo. It was an attachment to the Israeli embassy. It doesn't exist anymore. But I visited because I wanted to finally meet actual Israelis, actual Jews. At that point, I was fluent in Hebrew without ever meeting a single Israeli in my life or even speaking to anyone. And it was an amazing experience, but that experience basically put me in the radar of the security services who arrested me, arrested my father. My family then found out and they disowned me. And the government accused me of they suspected of me being a Zionist agent, a Mossad spy. They basically didn't have a box for me. Now, I learned a lot of political science. I know how states think. They really couldn't know what is he doing. Okay, he's not an Islamist. He's not like a political activist opposition, some sort of opposition. He's not, what is he trying to do? They didn't know, so they basically accused me of all of the mysterious mystifications that they themselves think of, which is, oh, he must be a Zionist spy, he's a Mossad agent. And I was 20, turning 21 at the time. It was a horrifying experience. That was my own very first meeting with political power, with political authorities. That was my official introduction to politics. My official introduction was state security forces knocking on my door and arresting me and arresting my father because they wanted to know, why am I talking to Israelis? Why am I talking about Jews? It was a long story. If you watch the documentary, and I encourage you to watch it and read my book. You can find it on Amazon, Minority of One. It was a very painful journey. It was a baptism with fire into Middle Eastern, the reality of Arab countries in the Middle East. And that was exactly the year before the Arab Spring. The last time I was in prison, actually, it was December 2010, exactly a month before the Arab Spring started in Egypt. The Arab Spring started, I joined, there was a lot of excitement, right? We called it the Arab Spring for a reason. People were excited, it's going to be the spring, democracy, there was genuine hope. You remembered the images, the Google guy, those young Arabs in the Tahrir Square in Egypt. It started like that, and I was there, I was part of it, I was very happy, I was very hopeful. But things started to take other turns. Islamist forces started to come to power, and eventually you saw what happened to Syria, the rise of ISIS, and I had to leave because I had no home in the landscape. Nobody wanted to talk about anti-Semitism and Jews in Israel right now. And I left and I came to the United States in 2012 and I received political asylum. I slept on the streets for the first couple of months. I didn't know anybody. I just had to run. But this is an amazing country, truly an amazing country, and I hope that, we can keep it this way, that opened the doors of life to me, of opportunity. And I ended up actually doing everything I ever wanted to do. I didn't just learn Hebrew. I actually taught Hebrew. I taught Hebrew at an Orthodox school in LA. Funny enough, even the students couldn't wrap their head around that I wasn't Jewish. And I taught Hebrew in a U.S. military school. I don't just have Israeli friends, I actually got to visit Israel personally, and it was an absolutely amazing experience. And when I meet Arabs and they ask me, they're very curious, what is Israel like? I tell them, imagine your best fantasy of what do you think Cairo should be, or what you think Alexandria should be. And that is Israel. And it's really hard for people to understand. A lot of people, Israel is very confusing, and I think I know why. Because it is confusing. It's a weird country. But Israel is a part of the Middle East. Not just a part of the Middle East. I see Israel as the hope of the Middle East. Not the hope that it's a perfect country. I don't idealize or romanticize anymore. I learned my lessons the hard way. But Israel is the model that a lot of Arabs and Muslims in the Middle East can follow. It's a country that can withhold the tension between having an ancient religion, tradition, and at the same time wants to keep the fruits of modernity, equality, freedoms. This is what the Middle East has been struggling with. How can we be Muslim and modern at the same time? How can we be Arabs and modern at the same time? I believe that Israel is the hope that this is actually possible. If they can be Jewish and democratic, you can make it too. And since I've been here in the United States, as I said, I've been teaching Hebrew. Now I work with Stand With Us to go to campuses, try to educate students, try to combat the rising anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiments all over the country. If I may say just a brief thing about that, things are getting worse. I can see because I'm an outsider. I came here in 2012. When I first came here, I met Roz Rothstein, the founder and CEO of Stand With Us. And she was explaining to me, I was new to America. I didn't know what American Jews are, didn't know anything. And she was explaining everything. And I remember at the time, their biggest problem was that Israeli speakers are being shut down in certain campuses. And she told me, I remember UC Irvine, it was Michael Oren had just been shouted down and shut down. That was the problem. Nobody was talking about physical attacks on Jewish students in campuses, physical attacks on Jews all over the country that we saw in last May. This anti-Semitism is coming from American political institutions, as we now see, from American academic. Nobody was talking about this 2012. Think about this. That was what? 9, almost only 10 years ago. That's a very short time for all of this to escalate. So I've seen this happen the same way that I've seen Egypt go through everything that's going through. I am seeing America going through things that all of them are not very good. And this is a big part of it. And this is why I do what I do. Also, right now I live in DC. I'm also going to grad school for international politics in the Middle East. And I learned from that. So far, I'm graduating soon. The best thing I learned is that I hate politics. But the reason how I arrived to learning this is because, unfortunately, in the Middle East, if we can say, talking about the Middle East, identity, sadly, has been a function of politics and function of international politics between states. Arab and Jew, Sunni and Shia, a lot of those, unfortunately, are tied to geopolitical processes that are happening in which rulers manipulate the most intimate thing that people have, which is their sense of self. And arguably, that's the only thing you really have. And sadly, that's been being heavily manipulated in the Middle East. And there's a precedent for this. It started in Europe, really, with extremist forms of nationalism at the early 20th century, and like the same way of thinking went to the Middle East. It's a long story. But I hope that this way of thinking doesn't come here to the United States, where people's identities get manipulated for short-term political gains. But also, I'm going to stop after a message of hope. The Middle East is actually changing. I actually believe so. There are shifts after all of the mayhem, after all of the chaos of the Arab Spring. There are signs of promise. Had you told me 5 years ago that there would be something called the Abraham Accords, all of a sudden Israelis would be roaming Dubai as if it was Bat Yam, that Saudi Arabia would purge its textbooks. I used to call them the kingdom of evil. Saudi Arabia purged all of their textbooks at school from all of the anti-Semitic and anti-Christian content. This happened. I personally didn't foresee this coming. And all of these things leave me very hopeful. The Middle East has its own reality. If I may ask you a personal request, if you want to do a personal favor and repay Hussein for what he did to the Jewish people, talking about the Middle East and America always is a function of talking about American foreign policy. And talking about foreign policy is talking about American politics and the ideological rifts. Don't fall for that, and don't do that. If you can talk about the Middle East, we can discuss the Middle East, we can discuss the Middle East on its own, not Now we're going to discuss the Middle East as a way of indirectly discussing American politics. The Middle East has its own pace. We have our own reality. I personally believe in a lot of great liberal values, but I know that the Middle East is not going to get there overnight. It's a slow progression, and I'm ready to tolerate the absence of democracy in places like the Gulf if they are willing to start liberalizing religious identity, of trying to bring people closer together, Christians, Jews, and Muslims. That's a great step forward, and I'm very happy to see it happening in the Middle East. Then thank you very much. Now I'll be more than happy to have any questions you may have. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's a great question. Actually, yes, I stopped talking to my family for a very long time, for about 6 or 7 years, but I think enough time had passed for them to miss me. And now, thankfully, I can talk to my mother, sometimes to my little sister, who's still working on my father, but I have no doubt. Also, as they get older, and they miss me more. So thankfully, yes. A few of my friends are now, actually, so I have an older brother. Maybe I talked about him in the movie. He's extremely religious. He's an imam. He thinks I'm an infidel. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll be able to talk unless he moves. He moves somewhat from that. But I do have another friend. He actually used to be one of my best friends during that period of my life. His name is Muhammad also. And he used to be very religious as well and all of this. But he actually has been changing, and we started talking on social media. So yeah, I'm starting to talk to a lot of people. And believe it or not, the Abraham Accords are helping me. Because all of a sudden, and that's what my mom said. She said when the Abraham Accords were talking, and when they announced the Abraham Accords, she said, "Oh, Hussein, they are doing what you said we should be doing." And I think, that's what, it's one, I think anybody, that's one of their dreams, that their mom actually finally realizes, yes, I was right. So it's funny how geopolitics, Middle Eastern geopolitics, actually affect my own personal life, because I've been, I started saying that at a time when it was extremely unpopular to say that. Now there are more people saying that. Maybe I didn't mention this, but there is also a media transformation that's going on in the Middle East. There is a new cleavage, a new space of voices who are saying different things. Like, why do we care about Israel so much? Our problem is Iran. It has to do with the geopolitics, but people are starting to get used to the fact that people say different things, and that changes how those people see me. So thankfully, yes, I'm starting to talk to other people.
I'm going to ask if you have a question or a comment, and if you're able to just come on up to the microphone when you're next one, so that everyone can hear you, Hussein can hear you, and you won't have to remove your mask to yell it. Please don't. Don't take it off. It's going to pick you up. It'll pick you up through your mask.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Yeah, my question is about Palestinians. What do you feel? And do you feel that something is going to, are they coming to a clash, or it's something is going to lighten up and so on? Because right now it seems it's escalating.
Wow. It's a very important question. It's a very difficult question. For the Palestinians, I don't see, I could be wrong, of course, but I don't think there is any possibility for any solution at this time being, which is problematic both for Palestinians and Israelis, but it's just how things are. As I said, the Middle East and I hate politics, and I actually hate that I learned to understand politics. The Middle East is an extremely unforgiving region politically, extremely unforgiving. What happens to you when you lose power in the Middle East? You die. It's not that you lose power and you become a pariah. It's not like you lose power and like you're Obama, you receive like, I don't know, $100,000 for a speech, or like Trump. You know, you're not, that doesn't happen in the Middle East. You lose power, you die. Not just you. You and your family members, and if there is a sectarian or ethnic element to the power arrangement, probably your group. And this is why Assad, for example, is fighting not just for his power, he's also now fighting for the survival of the Alawite ethnic group, which he's from, because if he loses power, they will be slaughtered as well. It's just sad, that's the Middle East is. So now you're talking about the population, if we're talking about the Palestinians, they have a huge political conflict internally, right? They are divided between two major political camps, both of them armed, both of them have big guns, the Fatah and the Palestinian Authority, and the Hamas. And they have different orientations. Those are Islamists, those are Arab nationalists. So when you have such a conflict, you can't move, right? Because that's the problem with politics. When you're so polarized, you're getting a democratic version of that in America right now, right? It's hard to get anything. I live in DC. It's hard to get anything done. Hard to get. Why? Because the country is so polarized, and it's because of polarized. You can't move anywhere. You can't get anything done. Imagine that in a Middle Eastern level, where it's like on steroids. You can't really do anything. So you can't get an agreement. You're not going to get an agreement with Mahmoud Abbas, with the Palestinian Authority. That's politically. Now, culturally, there is also a problem, and that's what I'm really passionate to understand and talk about, because this is how I got here to begin with. I got here culturally. I got here because I grew up in a cultural moment that taught me certain things that I wanted to learn. Okay, what is this about? The Palestinians culturally have a huge problems that haven't been addressed, and unfortunately, they have to do with the Palestinian identity itself. They have to do. Identities are not eternal, and they are not given to us from another world and just inserted into our world and have this eternal essence. No, identities are structures of ideas, and those structures of ideas do change. By the way, what does it? The word Jewish today has a different meaning in America than it has in Israel. 50 years ago, it had a different meaning. Not very different, but different. And then 100 years before that, it had a different meaning. And 200 years before that, it had a different meaning, right? For example, when the Zionist movement comes, a Jew was a nationalist term. A lot of them were atheists, but it became a national identity. 100 years before that, times of Moses Mendelssohn, right after, when Jews were trying to assimilate in Germany, they wanted to make it's just a faith. I am a German of the Jewish faith. I'm just giving this an example of how identities do change. They do change. And they have an ideological content of how you see the world, of how you see the ideological content of the Palestinian identity so far, in my opinion, is not commensurate to peace. And that is the problem, because it's the ideological content, a lot of it is taken from modern anti-Semitism and opposition to the Zionist project and the Zionist idea in Israel out of hand. And this has to change. And to change this, it's not a person, and it's not a political leader, and it's not Mahmoud Abbas. It's a society. You need to have a new cultural elite. You need to have a new poets. Anybody knows the name of the most famous, the national Palestinian poet? Mahmoud Darwish. I just paid like $400 to get all of his works from Ramallah to read them. And I read his stuff, I'm like, yeah, of course this is not going to work. As long as people like him are the national poets. He has, for example, he's a nationalist poet, the national poet. I'm sure there are Middle East Studies department here in America, chairs named after him. For example, he has a poem that says, this land has no room for two identities. It's either us or either us. This is a national, this has to change. And I'm not saying it can't change. There's a difference. I mean, because also a lot of people, the understanding of identity is also conflicted here in America. No, I'm saying yes, there is troubling aspects of Palestinian identity, or the ideological content of the identity, but that can change. So I'm just trying to give you, I don't know what's going to happen with the Palestinians currently. I think the best thing is to try to find peaceful arrangements to ease the life of the Palestinians as much as possible till they themselves have a political arrangement domestically that can have somebody who can sit with the Israelis and agree on something. That's my opinion. And that doesn't mean that, okay, we can ignore them and we can just go on with our lives and like when they wake up will come to us. I don't think that's also the right approach. I think we need to find people amongst the Palestinians who are ready to talk about those things. I do believe they are there, but I don't believe they are, first of all, I think they are marginalized by their own authoritarian political authorities. And I don't think there is an interest, whether, unfortunately, here or other places to talk to them.
It's very nice that you come and you speak to us.
Thank you.
However, what is important is to reach the college kids. And what I wanted to know if you are speaking at different colleges,
Yeah.
because this is where you would be the most effective and needed.
Yeah, thank you. That's actually, that's my main job with saying with this. I do speak with colleges, college campuses all over the country. Since COVID, it's been on Zoom, as you may imagine. This is actually only the third time that I physically traveled since the beginning of COVID. But yes, we talk on campuses all over the country. As you can imagine, sometimes we get a hostile reaction. Many times we don't. But we're trying. Things are on college campuses. I'll tell you my opinion as somebody who's been working on college campuses for a long time, and as a young person, and as a grad student, things in academia are awful. Are awful. There is an academic consensus. There is a near consensus right now that Israel is bad. And Zionism is evil, and you don't want nothing to do with that. And for Jewish kids, it's going to become harder, not easier. Not just to be a Zionist, I would say to be Jewish. It's going to become harder. And this is why I think the Jewish community needs to get together and to really push hard in education, not just outside of the community, not just me talking to to campuses, but your own kids. They need to have a strong sense of identity. They have to be confident in who they are because the pressure is going to be really strong. And the way it's going to work, that there will be rewarding mechanisms to exit. Like if you stop being a Zionist, if you stop being so Jewish, there will be rewarding mechanisms. You will be assimilated socially better. You're going to be invited to the cool parties. You're going to be, you're going to sit with the cool kids on the cool kids table in the cafeteria. What will happen is that you will have social penal code, basically, penalizing them, whether in the academy or college campuses or friends, and you will have rewarding mechanisms to basically to channel them in that way. And this, I can see it as growing. As I said, I'm not Jewish. I'm not, I love Judaism, but I'm not Jewish. And I'm not Israeli, but I do care about the Jewish people, and I care about the Jewish identity, and I care about the Jewish culture, because I think it's one of the biggest gifts for all of humanity. And I feel worried about these trends that I'm seeing on college campuses now. So you're right, but yes, I do talk there a lot.
First, thank you very much for coming and talking to us today. I have a question beyond the geopolitical issue. I don't know the first thing about Islam or the Quran. I never read the Quran.
Yeah.
There's a concept out there, or a thought that the Quran itself promotes e-assimilation, if we call it, or that it has to be, Islam is the only possibility. So my question is two. Number one, is that true? Is it like that? And the second question, if it is like that, how can we solve that problem? Because obviously the people that are religious Muslims, as you mentioned, your friend, and go by what the Quran says, will have a problem with that, correct?
That's an excellent question. Thank you. I'm going to be very politically incorrect. I'm going to say what I think. So first of all, Islam is a huge world religion. It's just absolutely huge. I myself, I keep discovering like how big Islam is. If we talk about Islamic heritage, that is the entire corpus of writings and doctrines and just intellectual foundations of different ideas inside that thing that we call Islam, we're talking about something that at one point used to be the third of humanity. At one point, the third of human intellectual activities happened within that thing. There are multiple languages. Islam is not actually, it's the languages of Islam, in order for you like to understand, it's not just Arabic, it's Arabic, Persian, Turkish. Those are major civilizations. There were civilized. So people say Islam is a civilization. It's not a civilization. It's even something that was bigger than that. And here I said was intentionally. Was bigger than that. It was actually a medium in which many civilizations arose. There were the Mongols that were Muslim. There were the Turks, various Turkic civilizations that were Muslim within Islam. The Persian Islamic civilization. There were a lot of things that were going on. What happened in this last century, and this is a larger story, is that all of this has been narrowed down into something called Islam. And that happened in the 20th century. And by the way, what I'm telling you, even Muslims would disagree with me. They think there's something called Islam, and it's been clear, and that's how people believe, and this is how people read the Quran for 14 centuries. It took me a long time to understand things, and that's my understanding. That only happened this last century. Whatever the vast majority thinking of as historical Islam, my opinion, is a fantasy. And I'm saying this not as I'm not a believing Muslim. I'm going to be honest. I don't practice. But the way that we imagine what that thing was is really, this is not how it was. That's one. About the Quran itself. The Quran is a very small text. I don't know how many of you know how big the Quran is. Yes. The Quran is a small text. All right. How big is the Tanakh? Let's say it's this big. How big is the New Testament? Smaller. It's maybe a third. Let's say the third of the size of the Tanakh, right? How big is the Quran? Almost a third of the New Testament. That's how big it is. So the Quran is a very, very small text. And you can't get anything out of it from which you can build a religion. It's that structure that I just talked about. That is where all of this comes from. So the Quran itself, yes, it has some verses that I can tell you, sadly, and this is, I know that many liberals don't want to believe, or liberal Western don't want to believe it this way, but this is how it is. There are certain verses in the Quran that the mainstream understanding of it in mainstream Islam within the 20th century was awful, was hateful, was against the world. It's us against the world. And that's how I grew up, and this is what I thought. Later, I discovered that same verse 2 centuries ago had maybe 15 different readings. But in the 20th century, the most terrible one became predominant. This is how it happened. Now, if you tell that to a Muslim, they would not want to kill me, because no, Islam is one. It's always been like that. How dare you say that it was something different? But this is a long story that I wanted to this is just, I'm sorry, I'm giving a context. So it's not that I want to hold the stick from the middle, but I want to make the picture much more complicated. Much more complicated. The mainstream Islam in the second half of the 20th century promoted at its core some things that can only be described as fascist, and held it as a primary doctrine. And honestly, democracy not coming to the Muslim world was a good thing. It was a good thing, because you don't know what people thought the religion is during that time. It was something awful. These are the mosques that I went to. So I want to say that is true. Sadly, that is true. People celebrated 9/11 around me. I hope I said that in the documentary. That is true. So, but at the same time, the same thing that I said with the Palestinians, I don't want you think that this is eternal. That this is just eternal, this is what Muslim identity is, that's what always was. I want to tell you the tragedy that no, this is new. This is new. It wasn't like that. It only became like that recently because of sad geopolitical developments. It became like that. And I now have a hope. I think there is a chance that this will change. You have people pushing against that all over finally. This was not the case 10 years ago. Now there are people pushing against that. There are people who are trying to re-ask questions. Oh, wait a minute. Is this truly what it says? What is this text? Where does that text came from? And there are some brave discussions and bold discussions that are happening around all of these issues. So I want to tell you, yes, there are structural problems in foundational texts of Islam and the ways that it's understood by a very large number of Muslims. But I want to, there are voices inside the Muslim that they are talking about this. Unfortunately, those voices, if I may say something, you don't hear about. They are not the ones reported. They are not the ones highlighted by institutions, sadly, including Western institutions. They are not, because that's other voices that are extremely harmful are the ones highlighted. I would say something. Ilhan Omar would not be elected in a Muslim country. And I'm not kidding. She would not be elected. It takes only America. It takes only a superficiality of understanding what Islam is, or what identity is, or like a hijab, what the hijab represents, for her to be able to play that card and win. She would not be able to play that card and win in Egypt. She would not be able to play that card and win among the Palestinians. So I'm sorry for trying to complicate things too much, but I hope I didn't lose you.
Is Egypt involved in helping the refugees from Syria, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, where all the economies are failing? And is Egypt involved in any of the other states involved in helping those refugees?
That's a great question. So Egypt is struggling economically. I mean, God help them. I don't think they have a room to help anybody, but there are countries that are helping. The UAE, actually, after the Abraham Accords, one of the greatest things, I don't know if any of you heard of that, but the UAE and Israel, they collaborated on a mission to rescue Afghan refugees together after the withdrawal from Afghanistan. And basically, the Israelis and them planned it together, and they sent Emirati airplanes. Of course, they didn't send Israeli airplanes, and they got refugees out. So there are people. The same thing with Syrians. A lot of those small countries are helping the Syrians. Israelis also are helping the Syrians, as you know. So there are a lot of efforts to help. I mean, there's so much help you can do when you have the calamity to that scale, right? I mean, you're talking now, you need help with what? Syria, Libya, Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan, Lebanon currently on the edge. I mean, nobody knows really if Lebanon is gonna survive anymore. Yeah, as I said, it's a very tough neighborhood.
I
wanted, your film was just wonderful. Thank you so much. You're taught. In your film, you talk about when you were in school,
Yeah.
and how you're taught to hate the Jews from a very early age, in the house, in the
Right.
school, etc. Has any of that changed?
Oh my God. Has any of that changed? Okay, there were news, I don't know, I don't live there anymore, but I'm trying to follow what's going on. So in Egypt, there were news that they will start for the first time, and this happened a year ago, to teach students in the school about the Camp David Accords. So this is that's a huge step forward. They will actually tell the students, oh, there is something called the Camp David Accords when we have peace with Israel. Socially, for Egypt, this is gonna take time. I don't know how much y'all know about Egypt, but Egypt basically, I mean, in a very funny metaphor, it was the Germany of the Arab world. And I mean it both in the good way and the bad way. So Egypt had almost a monopoly of producing Arab high culture since the beginning of Arab modernization till, let's say, the beginning of the 90s. So there is a large cultural heritage, movies, right, books, novels, the major Egyptian novelists. And a lot of the traditional, that anti-Semitism, that view of the Jews, that view of Israel, unfortunately isn't that heritage. And I don't know how they are going to deal with that. Like, if you just grow up in the culture, you will get it. because that's the movies that are going to be on TV. Those are the, if you want to read a novel, that will be. I remember, for example, there is this famous novel I was just reading for a big Egyptian novelist. It's Ibn Khair Shalabi. He's a major guy. And one of it was like about this small Egyptian village, and there's a really evil guy who's exploiting everyone. And it has nothing to do about the Jews. And like there's one line, like a guy describing that evil man saying, wow, he's a Jew, he's such a Jew. That's a line in a novel, right? That's the kind of, and those things matter. We think they don't matter, those little things. This is how you build a perception of reality. And I think in Egypt is going to be a problem. And honestly, maybe, and since this is an older crowd, you'll understand what I said. There was a perception in the past that there were more modern Arab countries and less modern, right? Egypt, Syria, Iraq, the Arab nationalist countries, the Palestinians, the people who wear suits. They were more modern, and you had the traditional Arabs with the dishdasha, with the white thing, right? Now I think the countries that modernized the earlier are going to have the hardest time to reform and modernize their culture. And we're going to see faster reform and faster modernization and being able to get rid of that way of educating children in more traditional Arab countries. UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia. The countries that modernized first and had more attachment to Arab nationalism, I think they will have a harder time because they modernized first. They produced a lot of culture that a lot of it was translated Nazi and fascist and German stuff. And that became, at the foundation of their modern identity. So for Egypt, it's going to take a long time. And the Palestinians, the same thing. It's actually very similar to the problem that I described with the Palestinians. But I keep saying those things, but also I know that people change. Like human history is so weird. I love history. That things change way faster than we think. So I'm also leaving hope that change in educational outlook will change how Egyptians understand these things. Please go ahead.
I appreciate your being here. I've really enjoyed your talk so far. And I think one of the things you mentioned, though, is that the Saudis have changed their textbooks recently, which is a good thing. And I'm wondering if they changed anything about their support of the madrasas that they've sent all over the world.
That's a good question. I haven't seen anything about that, but I would guess that they must have, because there's no other option. The way is, the Saudis are changing. There are major changes inside the structure of Saudi Arabia, just the arrangement. The ruling coalition in Saudi Arabia used to be the royal family, which is the Al Saud family, with the religious establishment. They had this alliance. The religious establishment gets social sovereignty. That is, they tell people what to wear, women where to go, where not to go, what kind of things to watch or listen to. And the Saudi royal family gets the political rights and the foreign policy rights. And that was a ruling arrangement for a long time. And with that ruling, and that's how Saudi Arabia, that ruling arrangement changed with the new succession or the future succession that's already in place with the young crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman. That's changed. A lot of those people are in prison from the religious establishment. He gave them a choice. It's an authoritarian country. As I said, it's a different world. Please don't judge it. I still believe in democracy and in liberalism. It's just, if you're going to look at the society, you have to look at all of it, the way it works. So it's an authoritarian, there's no democracy. He basically gave them a choice to the religious establishment and leaders of the establishment. You're going to say what I tell you to say, or you're going to go to prison. And that's actually how it happened. There are some of them who went on Saudi TV and said, we're sorry, we misled the Saudi public, we led them, this actually famous huge religious hit. He went on the first day of Ramadan, which is the Islamic holy month. This actually happened on the national TV of Saudi Arabia, and he apologized to the Saudi people that for the past 30 years, he's been leading them to a depressing, austere version of Islam that killed the joy out of life. Of course, he had no choice. I know it's not that he did it out of the benevolence of his heart, but this is what the crown prince is doing. Part of those are negative things, like him butchering a journalist that he didn't like in Turkey. It's sad. That's just how it is. But this is so. With that change, I don't see how they could still support the madrasas in Europe. It can't, because they are severing that tie and they are cutting out the religious establishment out of governance. So I don't think they are supporting the madrasas. However, now you have other people supporting the madrasas. Turkey is supporting the madrasas. Qatar is. I hate politics. I hate politics. And it's so sad that this politics play a role. They use religion, they use people. It's just the way it is. But hopefully, if there, as I said, and I'm saying this, I'm being completely honest. I'm not a believing Muslim, but I'm still hopeful that there can be modern versions of Islam that are enlightened, that move on, that find other image, a less austere and the more friendly. I'm hopeful that this happens. And I know if this can be created, this will automatically attract a lot of young Muslims away, because they are people, right? They want to live. If they can find an option that can satisfy the human need for, first of all, authenticity, right? Feeling that you're yourself. You're not betraying yourself. You're not betraying who you really are. They're for her spirituality. And at the same time, integrate them with the world. And this is what the UAE and the Saudis are doing. They basically want to be part of the world. We don't want to be against the world anymore. We want to be with the world.
Just to put this in a little bit more of a God perspective, there's so much ignorance. I mean, you're speaking from a very sophisticated perspective, educated, which I honor. But for some of the people, even like the Stand With Us people, you want to go talk to kids, or even more so their parents, another generation. We have the idea that, well, there's three religions that have come out of Israel.
Right.
You know, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam.
Right.
But Islam didn't happen until the 7th century or so that can't be true. But people don't understand that. So there's this sense of, well, but God made that happen, and so what do we do about that? I understand that there's such a thing as taqiyya, I think if I'm saying it right, that in the Quran says you can tell a lie as long as it advances the causes of...
It's not in the Quran, it's a secondary text, but it's there.
Okay, that's true. Okay, you're right. Of course you're right. How do we even speak to those issues to just ordinary people who are confused about those very issues?
Speak about them. It's part of the education. Education is not... This is why a lot of people don't get educated. Sorry, are you done? I'm sorry to cut you off.
I probably could have about 13 more questions, but we'll go with that one.
Education is a process of discomfort. You're going to be uncomfortable. This is what education means. If you are comfortable, then you're not being educated, I have to tell you. If you are in a place, you're not learning anything. Learning is a process of discomfort. And I know, so you go to somebody, let's say somebody who grew up with the liberal, their mind has been molded in good liberal values, live in America. And you can tell him, hey, there's the second largest religion of the world. They have this thing, it's called taqiyya. And they automatically, they don't want to, no, there's no way. I don't want to hear about this because it's uncomfortable. The discomfort is going through the process, knowing that this is actually true. But that doesn't mean that those people are not human or especially evil, but this is just a complexity of us being human. And the way that those people understand those things and deal with those things is very complicated. And then you go through the discomfort of trying to learn, what is that? What does that mean? What does it mean for me? What should I do? How to do this? And you go through that discomfort. And that takes time, and that takes an investment. And this is why education is an investment. And this is why I do social media. I hate social media, but I do it, but I hate it. Because it's not, you're not going to educate anything. I send tweets, but I feel, no, I want to sit with people for 2, 3, 14, 15 hours for us to talk about those things in order to, but it's an investment, it's a discomfort, you go through those things. I think you're right, it exists, it's in secondary texts, it's a doctrine, but as I said, those things are not eternal. That's what I want to say. I want to actually validate the people who say there are terrible things in Islam. I want to say you're absolutely right. There are awful things, and they became mainstream. That's even more awful. But I want to say that doesn't mean it's hopeless. I do think that, because you know what? Because I'm here. I changed. If I change, I don't believe that I am existentially and ontologically different than my older brother, or my younger brother, or my father, or my cousins, or my mother. I don't believe that. I believe that they are my family. I look at them, and they are my family. And I believe if I do it, then they can do it too.
Can I ask another question along some of those lines. How many of Islam is really actually Arab? Because
That's a great question. Yeah.
I mean, Malaysia, for instance, is not Arab.
It's not Arab,
but they're
yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Current. So, what would you say?
So actually, let me go back actually to something that you started with. There are 3 religions came out of Israel. We will be living in a much better world once actually you have a sizable segment of Muslims who actually know that. Right? I believe that is true. Of
What
course,
do you want them to know?
that Islam is from Judaism. That Islam is ultimately built on Judaism. Right? When you have a good segment of Muslims who actually know that and are fine with it, we're going to live in a much better world. Because that's also...
I'm confused by your statement, so maybe some
What do you mean?
others are. How do you see that Islam is built from Judaism?
It's built from a Jewish story. It's like they trace themselves to Abraham.
Okay, so it wasn't really... Okay.
I'm not saying...
the other son, right, I got it. Okay.
It's where did they get the story of the son to begin with?
Exactly, yes,
Right?
I
Like
got it,
the Arabs say, well, from Ishmael. By the way, where do you think they are from Ishmael? It's because of the Torah. It's not, they don't have any other, there is no other source for this. Like all of Islam, all of the idea of Islam, the monotheistic God, Abraham, the Ishmael, and then all of these, it's a biblical, it's a variation. If you want to call it a distortion, of course it's whatever you want to call it, but it comes out of the biblical world. You just can't deny it. Even the stories about Jesus, it's all out of the Bible. When you have, this is the historical reality, right? This is not fiction. This is how the world happened. This is how history happened, right? When you have a good segment of Muslims who actually are fine with knowing this, the world will become better. Because then you'll have normal relations. You'll have logical, rational relations between people. So that's, I just wanted to just support what you're saying.
Thank you for defining that.
Thank you. One last question?
I want to thank you for being here.
Thank you.
My background, I've been a rabbi 52 and a half years. I have a PhD in history, and ignorance is a bad, bad problem. I mean, in the beginning, Muhammad reached out to both Christians and Jews, and then he got very angry when they did not accept. At any rate, I had a dream about the beginning of my career, and I remember when Israel attacked the Beirut airport after hijackings. And I said to that congregation, it was the beginning of my career, it was around 1970, I said, I have this dream that Israel has all these technological advances, and at that point it was early in the game. I said, why couldn't there be a Mideast common market? Why couldn't the people work together? Because if we have and this, I would like your reaction to this, and I'll be very brief. If people have their basic creature comforts, they don't have to worry about having enough to eat, a secure home, some basic creature comforts in addition to that, they're not going to be into hating. They're not going to be into fighting. And I'm seeing signs of that beginning with the breakthrough economically. I too hate politics. I think ideology is a powerful weapon. People are victims of political manipulation. But perhaps, do you think that because of the breakthroughs that are made, that there's some hope in that area too?
I agree. I completely agree with everything you said. Like, why can't be there an open market? Why can't there be people really working and living together? And I agree with you. Once that's true, it doesn't matter who lives in Hebron. It doesn't matter if you have a house here on this side of the border, this side of the border. I mean, that's true. So I hope it happens one day, and I see hope as well. Thank you.
I have one more question and comment. You talk about education. I certainly agree that education is critical, but I recently was exposed to a podcast by the Mideast Forum, and it was an Aramaic in Israel, which is a Christian sect. And he's so happy to be in Israel because the Aramaics are accepted as an entity in Israel, which they are not accepted in other parts of the Middle East. And somebody asked him the question about the Arabs in Israel. And one of the big issues in the last Hamas-Gaza war was that many Arabs, fought against Israelis, and there was a lot of disruption. And someone asked the question about the educated Arabs that live in Israel, that are doctors, lawyers, and he understands Arabic, and they asked, what is their real thought? And he says, deep down they want to destroy Israel. And the comment was, and this is a word that I never heard before, it's the Lebanization process. Because Lebanon was once a Christian Arab country, and it was destroyed from within. And that's kind of the potential look that perhaps could happen to Israel, the Lebanization of Israel.
Wow. This is a very educated congregation. I can't get away with easy answers. You're absolutely right. And I personally have a lot of thoughts about how we talk about education to begin with. Because education for a lot of people became synonymous with skill acquisition and craft, basically. And that's not education. Education, so the Greek word from which education comes from, eudikre, and eudikre means to lead out. It's kind of leading out of Plato's cave, right? You're leading out of the darkness. This is what education means. It's almost kind of the contrast of the Aufklärung, or enlightenment, right? It's like you're trying to shed light into people. You like to help people have vision to see. Being a doctor or engineer, it's a great thing. So you're a doctor, of course. But most of all people probably, it's not synonymous with education. How many doctors have you met who really were also ignorant about the world? So we unfortunately, and this is, I think, it's becoming an American problem. And this is I have my own set of critiques. I love America, but I developed also my own critiques about how Americans think and what they think about education is, you're buying a socioeconomic mobility ticket, you're sending your kid to big school to get a degree in finance or this, and you think they are educated. And I don't think that's true. And this is why I think there is a role for places like synagogues, churches, civil society organizations like Stand With Us. And you will only be able to deal with this in a community. That is, people have to be part of a community, and that community have to have some sort of an educational project in order to do that. That's my education. I'm going to go back to the Arabs. So this is a problem. This is another. As I said, I have my own understanding of all of the modern Middle Eastern history. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the history or discussions about Islam or the Middle East or Arabs, but there has been always that idea that there is a conflict between modernity and Arab Muslims, right? There is a conflict between modernity and the Middle East. They are not failing to modernize. They refuse to be modern. And I think there's an idea. They refuse to be modern. I don't think that's true. I read everything. I went back to the 19th century, to the first meetings between Europeans and Middle Easterns. What was written? What did people think? What happened? They actually wanted to be very modern. They wanted to. But they wanted to be very educated. They believed in education. Arabs, look at how many Arabs are doctors, even in Israel, disproportionate amount. And that's a thing. The equating of education with skill, it plays a role there. And the kind of social and political and modern education that they received because of historical circumstances was not liberalism. They received the other side of education. That is, Arab intellectuals within, whether the Arab Israelis or Egyptians, that's why I said Arab societies that normalized first are the most problematic. And those are the ones collapsed, by the way, in the Arab Spring, not the monarchies. The ones who modernized first, they used Leninism, they used fascism, they used Nazism. They built on German, Italian, and Russian intellectuals. And that's why they received, and that's what they think education means. And later, the New Left in France, the Sorbonne, Sartre, it's a big story. But this is, in the Arab world, to be an intellectual, to be educated, it means that. It doesn't mean anything else. There are no other options. So that automatically, all of those very educated Western ideas, you could be an Arab intellectual, you speak French, you can give lectures about existentialism and Simone de Beauvoir and all of this, and you hate Israel and you think Israel should be destroyed. But that's because it's part of all of those ideology in which they were educated. Third worldism, and the opposition to Israel and nationalism and capitalism and all of this. And unfortunately, that became one of the core parts of the modern Arab identity. And this is why you'll find in the Arab Israelis, even the most educated ones, they think this is the right thing to do. I hope I didn't lose any of you. I'm trying to portray something I myself am still understanding. But unfortunately, this is why. You get this doctor, you get this engineer. They even went to Europe to study. They have an advanced degree from the Hebrew University, Tel Aviv University, but they think they still hold to those things. We need to no, Israel needs to be destroyed. It needs to be only a one state that will become an Arab state or a binational state, whatever. They still have that. And unfortunately, you're starting to have that here. And you see it on campuses. And you see it from Arabs and Jews here in America on campuses. And this has to do with other ideology that unfortunately became synonymous with intellect. You know, I'm not going to say their names, but you know what I'm talking about. There are people who think in order to be a thinking, critical person, you have to be part of that ideology. And unfortunately, that's been hegemonic in the Arab world, in modern establishments, in universities. And of course, it failed to stop religious extremism. It actually colluded with it. And unfortunately, it's still the case amongst the Palestinians. And this is why you're seeing all of these opinions. However, if I'm going to close with this, I see a lot of positive things happening with Arab Israelis as well. I see rising numbers of young Arab Israelis joining the IDF. I see a rising number of young Arab Israelis who want to be a part of Israel. So also, it's not all bad. There's also, things are changing. There are new arrangements of who's who and what is what. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to me. I appreciate it.
Just a quick moment, I want to say thank you. And we actually have a table set up there, so if you have other questions, a few questions for Hussein or myself about Stand With Us, we'll be here in the lobby over here on the left, and we'd love to speak with you if you have any more questions. Thank you.
met some of them at the Israel Friendship Day at the St. John's County Courthouse. Yeah, I have, because I used to work for a teacher. Okay, yeah, I used to work for them when I was in school, and so for whatever reason, I went to the major. So I know, it is, and the guy who runs it, he's very frank and amazing. You know who I'm talking about? He's very tall. No, what's his name? Gosh, if I saw him, I would know, you know? No, well, seriously, let's get together sometime. Whether you come down there or I come up here, whatever. Yeah. Floyd. Yes, okay, that's his name. That's his name. Yeah, it was good talking. But we'll catch up sometime.
Absolutely. Really pleasure meeting you.
Yeah, you too. My fiance, soon to be.
on one of the walls or even just back there.
Okay. So, is that becoming at least a little more familiar now?
Yeah.
You seem to be following it pretty well.
It's still a little bit hard reading, Hebrew without
Vowels, I know. That's okay. We'll do it together for you. And then keep you. The more you repeat it, the easier it's going to get.
where do I put the yod?
Huh?
Where do I put the yod?
We're going to put it on here when after I tie it up and cover it. You want to help me with that?
Sure. Found this interesting sheep article. Well, I'll browse like just the sheep. Well, like browsing what articles they have since I was. Since I finished my classwork early and I had and my
See there?
and,
right there.
and olive oil was a major product of Israel during ancient times.
What was that?
Olive oil.
Oh yeah, I know.
Oh, where?
Yep.
Oh, great. Oh my gosh. We have our wedding next year. In the downtown where that giant cross is. Okay, well, it's like, yeah, very close. It's on the water.
Right.
I have one final question.
Sure.
Which is great.
And this here has an eternal light, but don't use it. Like at least have to be electric.
It's on.
So for sure, I can barely see it.
Well, if you turned off the light, you'd see it.
Okay.
Because all the lighting around it kind of takes it out.
Okay.
Yes. Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, I think so. It's not oil.
probably electric.
Yeah, I'm sure. I don't know what you probably couldn't have an oil lamp here because of fire. Yeah. Yeah, probably. All right, so just keep practicing, okay? And we will see you next week. Anything I can do for you, or are you good?
I'm good.
Okay. See ya.